Hello and welcome to another edition of Fired Up. My name's Morgan McLintic and I'm joined today by Ian Lipner. Hey, Ian.
Yes. Hello. I'm particularly fired up today to have our guest on.
That's great. For those on YouTube, you can see him wearing his Fired Up t-shirt and looking very smart. So today we're going to talk about the role of marketing in driving revenue. And of course, to an extent, everything that a company does is to drive revenue. But specifically when it comes to marketing, how do you make that happen and how do you prove it? So we'll be talking to a CMO all about that. Before we get into that, just today we've announced our partnership with Apollo. And they are a data provider. So if you want to build out your ABM lists, if you want to get intent data, if you want to do cold email, this is a platform that does a ton of stuff. And it's really sort of priced for startups. So it's really good. And so this is the sort of next stage for us. We recently just launched our lead scoring model. How do you score leads? Now we can help with the sort of enrichment of the leads to make sure that you can score them properly. So I'm very excited about that. But our main topic today is, as I say, how you tie marketing to revenue. And so we'll be talking to Christine Schaefer, and she is the CMO of CrashPlan, which is a data protection and resilience leader. So I'm interested in talking to her about her general approach to marketing, and I guess when it comes to revenue, attribution specifically, and how she ties those two things together.
What's interesting about Christine is she's also really great at adding creativity to the brands that she works with. She cares about those metrics, don't get me wrong, but she gets there by doing a little bit more creative things than a lot of brands are willing to in the B2B world.
Right. How do you know when to take a risk? And I guess there's also that juxtaposition between building the brand, which is an investment and will pay off, hopefully, in the future, and then driving revenue lead gen today. And you've got to balance that out. So how do you justify or how do you allocate the revenue? So I'd like to ask her about that. And yeah, creativity. What's the role of creativity? Where does she get her ideas? How do you encourage other ideas from your team and then really bank those? And they've also just made an important acquisition. So I think we want to touch on that as well, because now you're integrating a whole new team with their ideas. You've got a new audience, you've got a reach, you've got a new proposition maybe. That's a unique challenge when it comes to marketing. So I'd be interested to hear her recent experience all about that. So please join me in welcoming Christine Schaefer, the CMO of CrashPlan, to Fired Up. Christine, it's great to see you. Welcome to Fired Up. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Morgan. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the role of marketing in driving revenue. And look, to an extent, everything that people do in a for-profit company is to drive revenue and profit for that company. But how do you think about the role of marketing in driving revenue and pipeline?
I think the very first thing somebody in marketing needs to be able to tie themselves to is actually the market and their customers. And then tying yourself to pipeline and revenue will follow. Marketing for so long has been so focused on trying to prove that it's a science and have metrics, which is important and been a big key part of my career. We've started losing sight of being at the table for discussions around pricing, packaging, and product. We're only talking promotion, and it's only one of the 4 Ps. So if you've got your metrics down and you can tie your metrics to pipeline and revenue, whether those metrics are promotion metrics, which is where most demand gen comes from, or whether they're how you're doing your packaging. And I give as an example, in the last 2 companies I've been in, one of the first things I've done in coming in was looking at the packaging and reworking the packaging. And I was able to show a before and after of the packaging and our per user price going up and our average ARR per customer going up immediately after. And I immediately had metrics that I could tie to pipeline revenue, but they weren't your typical, how many emails did you send metrics? And so getting to that and understanding all the metrics that marketing should be involved in and making sure that all of them tie to pipeline and revenue is really key.
Some of the marketing areas are easily tied to revenue, right? Demand gen, field marketing, you have easy metrics like that. So you kind of hinted at it. What sort of metrics do you get at when you get into product marketing? How are you telling you're actually tying back to revenue from those disciplines?
There's a lot into everyone understanding on the marketing team what outcome it is they're trying to drive. And this is how I organize all my marketing teams. They're all outcomes driven. So product marketing is not there to exist just to exist. Product marketing's function is to get the customer to decide to buy your product instead of another product. You might have a demand gen team. On my team, we call them growth. Growth's team's job is to get people to talk to you in the first place and even start a conversation. But product marketing is trying to get them to convert through the funnel. So my product marketing team, for example, looks at conversion rates. Did the web page that they write convert very well? How many people stayed on the page after they read it? How many people went from that page to the next page or took an action? Whether it's a web page that they've worked on, or whether it's a white paper that they've created, or a tool for the sales team to move people along. Maybe it's a script for the sales team. They are constantly looking at their conversion rates, where demand gen's looking who they're putting in the funnel. Product marketing on my team is actually called conversion marketing, and conversion marketing moves people through the funnel.
So do those people in product marketing, they have their conversion metrics, but do you also then tie all the way down to some kind of quota for the product marketing team?
Absolutely. They essentially share the pipeline quota and the pipeline creation quota, the target pipeline, as well as the same number that the sales team has for this is how much ARR we have to close. And it's in comp plans. It's in every discussion that we have. It's about what outcome are we trying to drive at all the time. And that should be closely aligned with your company and with your sales team. In our case, we have e-commerce as well. So my team has their own number that they carry separate from a sales team.
So literally, if you're in the product marketing team, you should know your own KPIs, the conversion metrics, but then you also need to have a full sort of chain of attribution all the way down the funnel so that you can actually build that a realistic quota and actually track your performance against it.
Yeah. So at CrashPlan for us, we have the two funnels. We have our enterprise sales funnel or e-commerce sales funnel, and we're looking at every step along the way. Each stage of the sales cycle, we're looking at the conversion rate from stage to stage, number of days in sale, average days to close. Those are all things that the conversion or product marketing team is looking at just as much as the sales team is looking at them, all the way to the end.
How can you tell something's not working, and what do? Let's say the metrics seem to be great up to a certain point and it's at consideration. What do you do to sort of remedy the situation, and who do you turn to work on that with you?
So there's the art of marketing, which I sometimes think people lose, but there's also the science. The art comes into the creation of the content. The science comes in measuring its impact. And there should be a hypothesis, test, and measure for every action you take. If I create this paper for the sales team to use in this stage of the cycle, then I should see this conversion rate go up or down. If you create the paper and lots of people read it, but the conversion rate doesn't change, then your hypothesis was false. And it's a great piece of content because tons of people read it, but it means it's in the wrong spot. So you can have something performing well, but not actually doing what you intended it to do. And so it all comes down to intent.
So when you say the wrong spot, you mean like the wrong point in their journey?
Exactly. It could be a fabulous white paper and you could argue it's beauty, but if you're using it at the wrong time for that person and it doesn't get you the result you wanted in terms of moving them from that step C to step D, then you need to go find out where it does belong. Maybe it belongs at the top of the funnel. Maybe it's just a thought leadership piece. You have to think through, why did I create it? Who did I create it for? And when are they supposed to get it? Because to right person, right place, right time, and in the right format that they want it.
So you just touched on an interesting thing here, because we need a lot of data. Marketing has become more data centric, but that can lead to incrementalism, right? We're just making things a small amount better. That becomes the game. But there's this other part of marketing, the creative part, right? Which almost is the sort of opposite. How do you blend that creativity with the data centricity, and how do you sort of make sure that, because some of the stuff, because it's novel, we've never done it before, so there is no data to support why we should do this campaign. So how do you make that judgment call?
I've actually got a strange brain that I think that I had. There was an old movie. It was Steve Martin and I think Lily Tomlin, and it was The Man with Two Brains, and he gets a second consciousness. I think that there's two brains in there and if you look at like my SAT scores and all these other different things I do, my creative, my English and my math were almost dead on same scores on my SATs. I tend to float back and forth between both. It sometimes probably makes me a little on the multiple personality thing going on for my team, but I flip back and forth. That's just a unique born that way thing. But in terms of training myself, there should be a certain amount of space in every marketing team, frankly, in every team, not just marketing, engineering, that's the experimentation space. And there should be a certain amount of, we're going to set aside 10% of our budget, 10% of our time to just running experiments. But they are experiments. They do need to have a hypothesis. If you're creating something, this beautiful thing that you're creating, this new piece of content, maybe it's a new podcast, maybe it's something we've never thought of. Maybe we're going to create one point we really are going to have holodecks like in Star Trek and create whole worlds. If you're going to take the time to do it, you need to understand why you're doing it. Unfortunately, while there is an art to marketing, we do have to have purpose. It's not like an artist who gets to go create. Joker 2, I think, isn't doing well in theaters because it was a piece of art for art's sake. I think when you are Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, you can do that kind of thing, and you don't need the money. Maybe your investors didn't realize that that's what you were doing, but you were doing it just for the sake of the art. But at the same time, for the marketing people, our art has to have some purpose. Is it meant to help a brand move from one group of people to another, to start appealing to a new audience? Was it to move people along the funnel? Why are you creating it? You have to have that hypothesis first. Then you can measure anything. If your hypothesis is, I just think this is going to make a whole bunch of people like our LinkedIn posts, fine. That was your hypothesis. Did your piece of art do that or didn't it? And you can measure anything at that point. Even if it's not easy to measure, you can still measure it.
Yeah, I like that art for art's sake. We certainly see sometimes problems with companies that are creating products, engineers creating products for other engineers, and then they look to find their market afterward. So that's really interesting.
I would argue that in those companies, they didn't have marketing involved in product. If we're our chief market officer, hopefully we would not let them create a product that wasn't for our customers if we're involved. So,
right. And I mean, in the realm of experimentation, there's been sort of this hesitation to be very creative, especially in B2B, right? There's sort of like this idea that we should be particularly staid and careful. But you've done some really creative things with B2B brands. So will you tell us a little bit about how you create the parentheses that you can operate within and without sort of going too far afoul to try to drop a Lady Gaga reference?
So I think it comes down to knowing your audience really well. Tech companies especially have a lot of freedom here. If you're Coca-Cola and you're creating something that every single person in the world has to like, okay, you're not going to be able to create something that's kind of fun, or you're going to have to keep the rails on. But if you're creating something for a specific audience, you have a lot more freedom as long as you are clear. So even Coca-Cola makes different flavors for different places. Today, with us being able to serve smaller niche groups with a message, that's great. And you can get more creative with certain groups than when you're doing something for a larger group. But I do think that people need to let the fear go. Yeah, there's a lot of backlash on this or that. But if you are careful with what you do and you're doing it for your audience and you know it's appealing to them, that would work. A lot of people in my joke with me about all the Star Wars references I've made over my career in my marketing. Truth be told, I have worked for other companies and not always made Star Wars references. I worked for a company that our customers were all high net worth individuals and executives. All my references there were pictures of people on Learjets flying around with briefcases and getting work done. And I didn't joke as much, but I did have fun with some really gorgeous creative about what it's like to live a high net worth individual or executive lifestyle. And I didn't have to worry about it offending somebody who wasn't rich because it wasn't for them. And Star Trek, saying Star Wars or Star Trek or any other pop culture references I bring in, they are carefully made for who the audience is that I'm bringing it to. Even this podcast, I can make a Lady Gaga and Joaquin Phoenix reference because more than likely everybody is going to have heard about it who's going to be listening to this podcast.
But it is a risk. And I've always been told funny is very hard to do. Maybe it's because I'm not that funny and they're just giving me advice.
It's hard for you.
But not every brand is willing to experiment. And that's something that I've always noticed about the brands that you work with is you find that way to show at least some cleverness.
Make it a chorus and let the chorus be funny. So maybe one of the blogs is written by Morgan, and Morgan's jokes don't land as well with the Ians of the world. But then you let Ian write a blog with his jokes in it, and they land well with the Ians of the world, right? So if you've got a chorus, when I was at a Threat Connect, we had blogs written by different people. We had somebody on our staff who was a threat intelligence person who had a degree in thermodynamics, and they wrote a blog post that was hilariously funny for people who understood thermodynamics and threat intelligence, and they thought it was fabulous. Did everybody get it? No. But when you did that alongside the guy who wrote a write-up of what if Stranger Things, what if we did a diamond model of threat intelligence and a threat intel assessment of the Demogorgon, what was the name of that thing? Anyway, what would that look like? And he wrote it up. Somebody who was into Stranger Things loved it. You put all those together and now you've got a chorus of funny. And any one of those people was not funny to everybody, but all of them together was funny for all of our audience.
I like this concept of, all right, lead with the customer and what they're going to find funny or what's going to resonate with them. And they're not monolithic. There are different segments within it. And you don't have to broadcast the same message to everyone because actually now you can reach different segments of your audience, different personas through their own channels and be what you want to be for them, like a diamond, or you called it a chorus, different facets of the same diamond all look different. And if you sort of take a step back, it's obviously gives you a broader perspective of the brand, and that enables you to take some more risks. So talking about brand, you're sort of building the brand here. We're thinking about marketing, driving revenue. Building the brand is an investment, especially for a startup. Like you're building a brand. At the beginning, no one knows who you are. You're building a brand for the long term. That's going to pay off down the line. You mentioned Coca-Cola. Its most important asset is its brand. It's certainly not the fizzy drinks. But yet, for a startup, we've got to get to different rounds of funding. We've got to survive the next quarter. And so lead gen is really important, right? We've got to fill the pipeline. That is what marketing is measured on in many ways. So there's a balance there, and you've got to allocate your budget. How do you think about the long term there and the short term imperative to drive leads?
Two things about brand. One, brand isn't something you create and then it just stays that way. Brands, like human beings, evolve. When you're born, your personality is not fully there. You've got an inkling of one, but like startups, when they're getting started, they might have an inkling of who they are, but it's going to grow and evolve and mature over time until it gets to a point where it's a pretty mature brand. But even then, it might still learn new things along the way. Coca-Cola is a mature brand. CrowdStrike, mature brand. But there's still tweaks that they're making every day to who they are, right? And all of us do that. So there's that piece of it. The other piece of it is to remember is brand is not as this or that as everyone remembers. Brand is everything that you do with your customers. And brand is not just a marketing responsibility. Marketing should lead brand and should be the ones kind of holding the flag up. But how your customer success person answers somebody through a chat interface, or whether you use a chat bot or not, those are all aspects of brand. Even if all you're doing is sending emails to generate leads and you're not doing any advertising, you're still impacting your brand. If all you ever use is email as a marketing tool, you're telling everybody email is the only way this company communicates. That's part of their brand. They don't like to talk to people and they're not participating in the community. You're telling something about yourself in every decision you make. Even right now, all of us on this podcast, for those listening, you can't see this, we're all wearing black. That decision today of wearing black says something about who we are. And if all we ever wear is black and we never wear any other color, it says something about our brand. And you didn't spend any money on it, but it certainly was an investment of a decision. And that's where you can be investing in brand as a startup with no money and then slowly make conscious decisions over time. And as you have more money, yeah, you want to put some of it towards advertising without necessarily wanting lead gen out of it. I do set aside a portion of my budget straight for advertising. Now I can still tie it to revenue. It just takes me a couple steps to do so. It's a little bit harder, but it's still there. it is very easy for me to show spend and leads go up and down, at least in correlation, and I can drive causation from that. Correlation being, did the two things go up together? Even though I can't directly draw a line between my spend and that person buying, I can show the trend lines. I spent on advertising here, and 30 days later, my leads go up. Okay, it had an impact. And you can show that over time. It just takes time to show that kind of impact.
Right. So your recommendation here is have a holistic perspective on brand, right? It's not just the logo and the website. It's the office you walk into. It's the person who answers customer support. It's every touch point with the company. So number one, even if you're not doing overt brand advertising, you are still building a brand. And the second is you need to invest in your brand in the long term, because if somebody's heard about you and they have a positive interpretation or perception of the company, they're more likely to purchase your product. There's definitely a correlation with that, but a causation is hard to sort of manage, but it's there. We all know it's there. How do you, though, prove to the board it's an investment, right? Let's say it's brand advertising or it's paid media or whatever it might be, or we're going to go to this event and that's to an extent a brand event. How do you justify that spend when it is causation and it takes time? And honestly, we did this thing and then 6 months later it had an impact.
There's a lot of pre-prep to it. If you come in after something's done and try and say, well, it gave us brand, that's too late. Before you even do it, you need to say, we're doing this for brand. And I expect it to have this impact. And here's why we're going to do it. Here's the impact I expect. And after it's done, I'm going to show you whether or not it did what I said it was going to do, whether that was booth visits or whether it was meetings held on site, whether it was positive mentions in social media. You need to have before you do it, how you're going to measure it, and put that out there to everybody. Put it out to the sales team. We're going to measure this event on this. For example, I don't scan badges in booths anymore unless somebody asks me to. Otherwise, they want swag. I give them swag. And I hand out stuff and I give them, take a t-shirt. Like, what do I have to do for it? Nothing. And especially in the tech industry, they love this because they're all using fake stuff anyway, and the booth scans are meaningless. Instead, before an event starts, I decide, am I measuring this event by how many meetings we get afterwards? Am I measuring it by how many qualified leads we get? Because at the end of the day, I know how leads convert once they're in the funnel. So in qualified leads, I have a definition for them. And I know beforehand how many I want. And if I don't get that number, then I have to evaluate whether or not that event was worth it. And I also will look at social media mentions. When you give away swag with really good swag or do something creative at an event, you can get mentioned. I have how many times were our stickers mentioned by somebody on Twitter metric that we measured once, and I'm sort of joking and sort of not, where I'm looking at how many people talked about the fact that we were different in social media and noticed. And I'm looking at those examples and pulling them up.
What I'm hearing from you is have a thesis, like invest in brand, it's important, but have a thesis on why you're doing, it's not a random act of marketing. We're specifically doing this. We're going to have these t-shirts. We're going to give them away. I'm expecting from this, people will have a more positive attitude towards the company because normally you have to swipe your badge and put up with the emails. And we've got something funny on here. People will wear them and I'll measure them by social shares or we'll see it down the line. And that's your approach to building the brand and justifying the expense for it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, but measurement is really important here, right? It sounds like if I've got a thesis, if I do this, X or Y will happen. Measurement is really important. And so that really comes down to this, the MarTech stack and being able to measure. And so how do you think about investment in the MarTech stack? Obviously, there's lots of shiny tools that you can have that purport to do various things, but as you keep investing in them, you add complexity. So what's your approach to attribution, measurement, and MarTech?
When it comes to MarTech or tech in general, I want to be slow to adopt. I want to know, I'm going to have run enough experiments without it to know that I want to do it at scale. So for example, I want to do a certain amount of, I'll call it poor man's account-based marketing. I'm going to want to do a certain amount of stuff where I'm just running campaigns through LinkedIn without any help to see if it's working for me before I go buy 6 Sense or a 6 Sense competitor any of the numbers. I'm sorry, I shouldn't call one out over the other. But what you don't want to do is buy the MarTech first and find out afterwards if that's the right thing for you. Because you'll end up doing something that's not really the right thing for you to be doing because you've got the tech there and you've got to justify having spent the money on it. And you'll be a year down the line of learning how to use that tech before you can find out if it worked or not. So have a certain amount of understanding of what you're doing and how that tech works. And that's in everything you do. You don't necessarily want to go buy. So for example, do I want an iPad or laptop? Well, why don't you kind of live with one for a little bit, borrow somebody else's, give it a try before you go commit yourself to buy yourself an Apple laptop for however much it costs, or whether you're buying an iPad, or if you want a Dell computer, that's good too, right? But know and try for a while. And try doesn't mean go into the store and click on it a little bit. Really go know if that's the right thing. And same thing in marketing. Have that hypothesis, test it, and measure it enough times. If you ever watch the show Mythbusters, they always create a scale model first, tested it to make sure that at least the theory was sound before they went and invested the money to go do it big. My MarTech stack has been different at every company I'm in because what that customer needed and the route to market was different in every company I've been in. There are companies where I loved using HubSpot as a CRM for both sales and marketing, and companies where I only wanted it for marketing and sales needed something else. There are companies where I have an e-commerce shopping cart solution in my website and others where it does not belong there. Some companies, you want to have a demo tool in your MarTech stack because your product demos well and fast. Others, you can't do demos like that. They don't work. You got to do something else. So know what you want in some small scale before you can make a MarTech investment.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that, you're not somebody who's like, okay, well, here's the tool set that I come with and plop it down. And it reminds me a lot of, some of the criticisms people have of like NFL coaches and things like that, where, hey, you got a different scenario here. So that's really interesting. I touched on this a little bit before because I'm really interested in how you kind of figure out what to do if something isn't working, right? Like we talked about it maybe as a piece of content, but what if a whole channel is underperforming? How do you know whether you should abandon ship or double down?
The data obviously tells a story. It also depends on the channel. So there's some places where if you're doing it and it's solely marketing's decision, it's a little easier to walk away. If we're running ads on LinkedIn for leads, our hypothesis, LinkedIn ads will get us leads, but it's not getting us leads. That's an easy decision to make and say, I'm not going to use LinkedIn. But if you're running ads on LinkedIn, both to get leads and to try and get brand awareness amongst a certain segment that you don't normally have, or to get in front of some people just for thought leadership, and the leads aren't coming in, but the thought leadership is, then it's a different discussion and a different decision of, it's much harder to walk away. Okay, well, maybe we don't walk away, but maybe what we do is change the investment and change the measurement. And this now comes out of that bucket of money I set aside that's advertising only and not lead gen. If it's a channel as in a particular outlet to try and get to a particular audience set, or if it's a channel like resellers or using e-commerce, you've got to involve all the stakeholders and make some decisions and make sure they all understand why you're walking away from it. I've had the problem of the CEO being able to say, well, I like LinkedIn, we're doing it. You have to be able to fight that with metrics and choose those fights. So there's some politics involved in walking away from something that's not working that you've got to but account for in addition to the metrics. And then the decisions come with that.
I think for LinkedIn, it's a particularly great example because, look, everyone is on LinkedIn, probably in a B2B sense that you want to reach. So you know that they are there. We've seen it drive really great, cheap, high quality cost per lead for some companies, and others, hey, we're targeting, neuroscience professionals. They're only on LinkedIn to get another job. They have a whole other social network that's where they hang out. They're not on LinkedIn every day trying to sell to other people. That's just not where their community is.
Yeah.
There's no point in advertising to them there because they're on their own specialist network that you and I don't ever go to, but it's the hub for them. And so, yes, they're there, but they're not buying. They're trying to get a job.
That's not where they're at that time. And so you might still want to do LinkedIn to reach that group, but instead you join some groups, you do some organic stuff. Maybe you just do some ads for the sake of staying ahead of them and let them see your brand, but that's it. You make the choice based on the customer. There's so much of marketing that's become narcissistic. It's about what I want to say, when I want to say it, and how I want to say it, because we have to do it cheaper, faster, and because I don't know my audience. And I have this discussion with my team all the time. Nobody likes narcissists. You could argue otherwise, but we can debate that, because if they like them, they claim they're not narcissists. But you don't go on a date and talk about yourself for 2 hours on your first date and then expect to have a second date. And if all you ever do is talk about yourself in your marketing, if you talk about your product all the time, you're boring. And fun isn't always about making a joke. Fun is about also somebody who gets you. And if all your marketing is about, well, LinkedIn was easy for us, or pay-per-click was the cheapest way to do it. Oh, well, it was easier for me to play it safe and not do anything fun with something tied to pop culture. Or I don't understand what people find funny, so I'm going to do what's easy for me. That's all narcissistic statements. None of that has to do with your prospect or your customer. And so the sooner you give up making it about you, the sooner you are going to start being more successful. Because marketing is supposed to be the voice of the customer. We're not supposed to be the voice of the company. If this was Office Space, we're the guy who tries to justify his job and goes, but I know the customers really well. That's important. Every company ever, there's so many stories out there of companies that lost sight of who their customer was and what they care about, and then they go in the tanker. There's a particular phone case company my daughter loves. She's a teenager. She loved their cases because she could drop her phone all over the place and it never broke, and their stuff was cute. Something happened and now their stuff's still cute, but now it's constantly breaking on her and she doesn't like that particular brand anymore. They lost sight of who their customer was. Klutzy teenagers who drop their phone a lot and need protection, but also want cute. And they focused on just the cute and lost the klutzy teenager, and they've lost a customer because of it.
So I think that's a good example. I often think of it a bit like sort of a dinner party. You don't want to be the dinner party guest that just talks about yourself. That person, as you say, doesn't get invited back. Just changing gears a little bit, let's talk about acquisitions, because CrashPlan has just made an important acquisition. Congratulations. And from a marketing perspective, this is an interesting challenge, right? Because you've got a new brand, you've got to align the brands, you've got new team members. Maybe this opens up a whole new audience and customer segment. You've got to sell this product into your core base. Like, there's a lot to unpack in there. Just talk to me a little bit about, though, because you're going through it. What's your approach to acquisitions in general when it comes to startups?
If you understand why you acquired the other company, it helps you define what you're going to do from there. If you're acquiring the other company to open up an entirely new market, you're going to need to make more changes to your brand because you now need to appeal to that new market than if you acquire a company just to add a new piece of tech, or if you acquire a company. In our case, CrashPlan has this great customer base, and most of our customers who worry about backup and recovery of data are protecting intellectual property. We've got a lot of researchers. We've used the term idea workers to talk about them. We acquired another company just to give newer products to that same group. So I'm not approaching this as I need to do a rebrand. I'm doing this as I need to do a refresh, which means I just need to expand my brand enough that they understand that I have new value that I didn't have before, but I'm still appealing to the same audience, the same buying persona with a few tweaks. And the why we acquired the company drove the why and what we need to do with the brand and how. When it comes to bringing in new team members, it's somewhat similar, going back to my don't be a narcissist. These people coming in aren't here to just serve whatever agenda you had before the two companies were brought together. They've got ideas. They've got things to share. And they were hopefully successful with their customers already. So you need to take those two things and really listen. Be the dinner party guest who really listens to the other people first, and then start bringing and pulling things together piece by piece. Make the new team members feel super welcome and part of the team, and then see what they can do to try and elevate the whole brand together. The rising water helps all boats rise. What's the phrase?
Rising tide.
Yeah.
Even though you're acquiring the company, the whole point was you're supposed to both be getting something out of it, both be getting juice out of it, both getting risen up. So it's kind of a twofold thing there, but both pieces are equally important.
Yeah. And making sure that you're learning from what they know as well is a big part of that, and I'm sure that even goes all the way out into the metrics side. You talked a little bit about how you're kind of known for bringing Star Wars into marketing, and then you already made a reference to Star Trek in this podcast. So What lessons from the stars, we'll just say, could you give to startup marketers?
So my first thing is be authentic. The reason I can make Star Wars references in marketing or let other people make references that I pull into my marketing is because I actually know the genre, and to an extent, it's funny how many people associate me with Star Wars. I'm actually more of a Star Trek fan. And if you really want to get into it, I'm sci-fi in general, but I also do other genres. So I don't ever try and make a reference to something I don't know the reference I'm making. If somebody on my team comes to me with a idea, we already have an idea for next year's theme and it's game related, then I bring in experts on that thing. And I might go study up enough on it myself to know that what reference they're making is real or not. But I don't ever make a reference I don't understand, because that's not right. That's not authentic. And nobody these days puts up with that anymore. So if you don't have a marketing team strong in a particular thing, even if you think your customers would like you to make reference to that, or your prospects, you've either got to study up on it and let it become you, or be real and be what you as a company can do. Not necessarily you as a person, but you as a team. I do have people on my marketing team who've never seen a Star Wars movie or an episode of Star Trek, and they never try to be the ones that work on those projects. The Stranger Things project that somebody once did that I talked about earlier in a different company, the person who did it watched the show avidly, and the people who checked their work to make sure it was good were also fans of the show. So we pulled from what people's experiences were and what they could really do inside the company. That being said, I am all over the place. I have a lot of stuff, so I can make lots of pop culture references all day long.
You made the holodeck reference earlier to talk about our future marketing experiences. Any other things from Captain Kirk that would come in handy for me?
It's funny because I actually wrote this in my notes even about the whole Star Wars, Star Trek thing. Star Trek is a lot more like what a marketing department should be than Star Wars. Star Wars is rebels that are out there doing some stuff and they're constantly fighting. Ironically, you could also argue whether or not who's the bad guys in that movie. I mean, I have my opinions, but really the rebels are the ones that are upstarts and changing the government. Okay, fine. But Star Trek, you've got explorers who are out there using a data and knowledge that they've gained from past experiments to go out and meet new people, get to know them from their standpoint. They have a prime directive that they're never allowed to go negatively impact another group of people that they meet. And they're never supposed to bring something to a group before that they're ready for it. They always do things in teams. They have their roles. They know how to play their roles. They have the engineering department. They have the security department. They have command, and they have the red shirts whose job it is to go out and die. I don't know why they do that to the red shirts, but they just do.
Yeah.
Right. And they have protocols. Those protocols can be bent or adapted when they need to, but they try to repeat and do things certain ways so that they can repeat what they do. The Starship Enterprise is a science vessel. It is not a warship. It is not even though they get into battles because they have to sometimes, they are stacked with a diverse group of people who are there to do science. And that's bigger and more marketing-like than Star Wars by far.
That's true. And to your point about authenticity, Picard would have been the one that had the holodeck, right?
Picard absolutely would be the one to have a holodeck, and that's okay.
Yeah.
One of the greatest things to think about with Star Trek is Gene Roddenberry was actually a humanist. As a philosopher, he was a humanist. He believed that humans were both the cause of and the solution to all problems. He also, very funnily, the original Star Trek with Kirk was not his vision because the studios kind of took it more fun. TNG was really more what his vision of Star Trek should be. And it was always hysterically funny that he had the person at the helm in the beginning of the series, Geordi LaForge, was blind. And it was his poke at, we're all just the blind leading the blind out here in the universe. There's not a single one of us that knows everything. And I try to take that attitude into a lot of what I do. I don't know everything. We're all out here exploring. My team is here with me. And I'm the blind leading the blind that we've all got to sit here and feel our way around and figure things out together.
There you have it. We're all in a Star Trek. You know, if you're in startup marketing, you're a lot in common with space explorers in Star Trek. That's a great analogy. So what I've here, before we get into our next section, just to wrap up here, what I've heard here is from your approach is always start with the customer in mind, have a thesis about what you want to happen. You've got a thesis and a way to measure it. You can be creative And you should be creative in building the brand and expressing the brand. And you can take calculated risks because you can segment your audience a little bit to kind of make that come alive. And even if it's not been done before, because you've got your thesis, you can prove whether it's working or not. And I think a lot of your creativity here is really coming through from the sort of plurality of your interests. We've talked about Star Trek and Star Wars, but I think a lot of marketers get their ideas from all sorts of places, right? And it's making that connection in here and then presenting it in a novel way. And that's really important. And you were a great example of that. So I think there's some really good advice in there. Thank you for that. Really enjoyed the conversation here. I learned a lot. If people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
They can find me on LinkedIn /Christine GDS.
Okay, LinkedIn's the best way. So Christine Schaefer is the CMO of CrashPlan. And thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed our conversation. And we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Talk soon.